What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and I know everyone's probably really excited about the new Drukhari spoilers that are coming out. I don't quite have those yet, but I'm sure we'll be talking about the new Drukhari book as soon as that releases and we get all of the pages. It's very exciting for everyone. But today we're going to be talking about some Armies of Renown coming out of War Zone Charadon, the other book that's coming out, one that's coming out with a little bit less fanfare, but this book contained 3 Armies of Renown, which are essentially theme forces. If you played War Machine and Hordes back in the day, they had basically the exact same mechanic. You would impose some list building restrictions on yourself in exchange for getting some particular benefits. In this case, additional warlord trade stratagems and a couple special abilities. The 3 included in the book that we're going to talk about in this video are the Mechanicus Defense Cohort, the Freeblade Lance for Imperial Knights, as well as the Terminus Est Assault Force for Death Guard. I'm going to be covering each one of those. In addition, there are some codex supplements in the War Zone Charadon book. They're essentially similar to Space Marine Codex supplement for a particular subfaction where you get a whole bunch of extra warlord traits and abilities for an existing subfaction in a faction. We got those for Cult of Strife as well as House Raven and Forge World Metallica. I'm going to be honest, I think for the most part those are a little bit less impactful than the Armies of Renown. First off, they're not like a brand new mechanic, but also they lock you into a particular subfaction, and you know, not all those subfactions are created equal. I may cover those codex supplements in a future video, but right now we're just talking about the Armies of Renown. So starting with the Mechanicus Defense Cohort, and we have a page here, the first one, to describe the restrictions and benefits that you get. First off, the restrictions: all units in your army must be Adeptus Mechanicus and drawn from the same Forge World. Now, I believe that this precludes your inclusion of any Agent of the Imperium style units. I'm not 100% sure. I believe those units do not, or I think they ignore abilities that require your army to be keyworded. I don't think that they ignore this restriction, but that may require clarification in the future. But the other restriction, I think, even honestly, maybe the more impactful one, your army cannot include Scutarii units. Now, that's Scutarii keyworded. That's not just things like Vanguards and Rangers. That's every single Scutarii keyworded unit in the Mechanicus faction. So that's things like Archaeopters and Cerberus Raiders and Onagers and Scorpii. So already a ridiculously tough restriction on the army. Basically all of the best units in Mechanicus immediately removed, so you can't bring those in this. So that's one thing to keep in mind while we're talking about it. You do get some benefits. Everyone gains the Mechanicus Defense Cohort keyword. Your Cataphragm Breachers, Destroyers, Servitors, and Castellan Robots gain the Extremis Sentinel Protocols ability, and you get some special warlord traits, relics, and stratagems. So the Extremis Sentinel ability removes your Forge World Dogma. So in addition to only being able to take Adeptus Mechanicus and not taking Scutarii, on the majority of our army, we also lose our subfaction detachment ability. We're basically replacing it with a new one, so that's fine, but it does mean that you can't, for example, build this in addition to, you know, taking the standard Cataphragm Breacher spam custom subfaction abilities. To give them, you know, exploding 5s with their arc weapons, for example, which would be really good. I think that would make this army actually relatively powerful. But unfortunately, no Forge World Dogmas for them, so you're just playing with these Extremis Sentinel rules. Now, what are those rules? Each time an attack is allocated to the unit, if it's in your deployment zone or if it's entirely within range of an objective marker, you are -1 damage. So you become Death Guard when you stand on objectives, which is pretty good. That does require that every unit is in range of the objective marker. So if you're bringing like big 9-man breacher squads, the entire unit has to be within 3 inches of that 40mm circle, which is a little tough. You got big bases on those dudes, so it's going to be a little awkward. In addition, they're essentially always in defensible terrain. They can hold steady or set to defend when they're declared as a charge target, so they hit with Overwatch on 5s, or they get +1 to hit in melee swinging back. That's fine. Hitting on 5s in Overwatch especially is really good. It is not as good as the Exploding 5s ability already was in the special subfaction, or the custom subfaction, but yeah, it's okay, I guess. +1 to hit and melee on against a charge too is pretty good if you're not going to be overwatching. But I like that you're giving this to Castellan robots too, because like Castellan robots already kill whatever that they whatever they is charging them when they shoot. So you just get to do that even harder, which is fun. For the special Warlord trait and Relic, the Warlord trait is actually incredibly powerful. It gives a 6-inch aura to the Warlord that gives everything objective secured. So basically Rights of War and Extremis Sentinels. So your troops options, for the most part, count as an additional model when determining control of an objective marker. Really super powerful Warlord trait. This is probably the reason that you'd be bringing this Army of Renown. If you were going to, for any reason, this is like a really, really powerful ability. In addition, they have a Relic Volkite Blaster, which is fine, I guess. I don't know if anybody's really excited about that. But then we have some special stratagems. Citation of Ruin gives a unit big guns never tire for 2 or 3 CP and doesn't give it the penalty to hit if they're shooting heavy weapons in engagement range. Good ability, but a lot of CP. Especially since you will probably want to be bringing medium or large size units of Cataphrons in order to make the most use of that extra resilience. Dropping 3 CP to let those guys shoot is a ton, especially since they punch okay in melee. I do like the ability. I don't know if this is, this won't by itself make you want to take this army, but it is a nice benefit if you do. Pre-calibrated Purge Solution gives you +1 to hit if you're shooting from your deployment zone into the enemy deployment zone. Not that great, to be honest. The army wants to be moving up the table, and I mean, 9th edition of 40k wants you to be moving up the table, and getting +1 to hit for not moving up the table is not very good. We've seen that spoiled already, and I'm not very impressed by that. Bolster Defenses gives you an additional +1 to saving throws on one piece of terrain that is within your deployment zone. Again, we want to be leaving the deployment zone. That's the goal with this army. And yeah, I don't know. This is like a classic Space Marine ability. It's kind of funny that Imperial Fists don't have this, but it doesn't seem super useful to me. And then lastly, they have an Orbital Bombardment ability for 3 CP. Could potentially deal D3 mortal wounds to everything within a big 12-inch circle at the start of your next command phase, so your opponent has a turn. They can hear the shells incoming, and they have a turn to get out of the way before they hit. And then on a 6+, it also reduces the toughness characteristic of stuff hit. I actually like the toughness reduction. I wish that was more reliable instead of just being on a 6. This particular form of orbital bombardment doesn't have any bonuses to hit the models in it. It's only -1 if you hit a character. It's not +1 if you hit like a unit of 10 or more or something like that, or a non-vehicle unit, which would make sense given this is a rad attack. So you're just trying to hard roll 6-ups, which is really tough. So yeah, I don't know if that one's super duper useful either. Overall, not very impressed with the Mechanicus defense cohort. The Skitarii restriction, I think, immediately kills it. Mostly the reason you're playing Adeptus Mechanicus is for Scorpii and Iron Striders and Fusilovs and Cerberus Raiders. You can't take any of those. So those are the reasons that, like, those are the reasons that Mechanicus is one of the strongest factions in the game. And if you're going to take those out, you have to replace it with something insane. And I don't think that this Army of Renown quite does that. A little bit of a miss from this one, unfortunately. But we can move on to the next one, the Freeblade Lance. So this is a subfaction built entirely, or an Army of Renown built entirely out of Freeblades, who are Imperial Knights who do not have a subfaction keyword, or a subfaction trait. Instead, what they do is they gain quality and burden abilities. Usually, you either roll for 2 qualities and or select 1 quality, and then select 2 burdens or roll for 1 burden on the table. I'm not going to talk about what all of those are, but for qualities, there are things like +1 attack against units of 10 or more models. You can heroically intervene 6 inches. You can roll randomly and get extra weapon skill or ballistic skill. That's pretty good. You do have to roll for the burdens. You take a leadership test essentially at the start of your turn to see if the burden affects you. But it could be things like you cannot be affected by stratagems for a round. You reroll 6s to hit, so you might miss those instead. So some pretty big drawbacks there. But this Army of Renown does change in some capacity how you generate those. And it also gives you the ability to ignore burdens, so that's pretty good. Now, big downsides, the restriction is that your entire army must be Freeblades. So, you can't take anything but Imperial Knights. Oh boy. I think Imperial Knights are not in a terrible spot if they're souped in And a lot of people are trying super hard to make them work and actually succeeding, souped in with other Imperium armies. So I think Knights in and of themselves, not a terrible pick, although I don't think Knights all by themselves going to be that great because you have very little board presence with that army. So it's going to be a little bit awkward. So the benefits that you get, everything gets the Freeblade Lance keyword. You get the special Warlord trait, relic, and stratagems. And every Freeblade Lance model gets qualities and burdens. So that's either choose one quality or roll for two qualities, and choose two burdens or roll for one for every single model in the army. So that's going to give you a very wide breadth, a sort of Robin Hood and his merry men-esque entourage of Imperial Knights, all with different abilities, which I think is cool. It's going to be a nightmare for bookkeeping, especially if you have like a bunch of arbingers or something in your army. It's going to be a mess. But it also gives all of your characters the ability to pick two qualities and one burden instead of rolling for them, which is great. So all your characters are going to be a lot better. Moving on to the Warlord trait, it gives you a sub-faction ability from another Imperial Knight sub-faction. Great, that seems fine. The relic is a special Reaper Chainsword, so I don't know, seems fine. But then we move on to the stratagems, which are actually pretty important. Brothers and Sisters in Burden for 1 CP gives you a 6-inch aura at the start of your turn that gives all friendly Freeblade Lance units the ability to ignore burdens. So as long as we play relatively contained, then everyone gets just their qualities for free and nobody gets any detriment, which is really cool. Strength from Exile gives you reroll 1s to hit and wound if you're outside of 12 inches of enemy models. I think this is actually probably fine, especially if you're like full tilting a knight all the way across the table. They're going to be outside of 12 inches of the rest of your army. Plus your army's not very big. It's not that many models, so it should be easy to trigger. It is 1 CP for the small or medium-sized knights. A Castus or Dominus, it costs 2 CP. To reroll those ones, but that's fine for 1 CP. Deeds of Legend is a cool one. When you kill an enemy vehicle, monster, or character, you get a quality, but you don't get any. You don't have to take any burdens for that quality, which is pretty cool. Lastly, Favored Knight gives you a relic for 2 CP though, which is a lot, and especially your pure knights, you're going to be pretty strapped for CP. So 2 CP for that is a lot. I don't know if you're going to be using that too often, but it's there if you need it. Overall, I think that the Freeblade Lance is certainly interesting. I think it's a cool and unique Army of Renown. Sort of changing the focus of your army to these quality and burden mechanics is really cool. The downside is that, oh boy, pure knights, man. Yikes. It's not even like, you know, pure knights like we're taking over 50% knights and then calling yourself pure knights. This is you only got to take knights, so you can't take anything else, which is going to be rough. So I don't know how excited I'd be about that. But it is a cool ability if you want to build that way. Last but not least, certainly not least, we're going to talk about the Terminus S Assault Force. This is a Death Guard Army of Renown, and whoa, this one is pushed, I think, compared to the other ones. There are a lot more benefits and abilities to this army than the other ones. So this one definitely, I think, is the one that have people the most excited. Death Guard are a recent release, and they're doing really well right now. And so giving them additional options to build their list is pretty cool. And this one is an interesting one. Now, there are some pretty hefty restrictions on top of that. First off, you cannot have any vehicles, which is a big deal. Death Guard, for the most part, rely on their vehicles to provide long-range fire support because the rest of their army is ridiculously slow. So they make up for that by bringing a bunch of guns strapped to, like, Volkite Contemptors or Plague Burst Crawlers. You just can't do that. Normally, you'd make up for that deficiency by taking a fast thing, like, I don't know, Mortarion, but the second bullet point is that you cannot include Mortarion. So, we're going the same direction as the Mechanicus Defense Cohort. You can't have any of the best things in the faction, so that sucks. Oh boy. Your entire army must be Death Guard, so you can't soup in any other chaos, which is, I think, to be expected. And it all has to be Harbingers if it has a Plague Company keyword, which makes a ton of sense. That is also the Plague Company you would want to bring with this detachment, or with this army. So I think it's fine. Typhus also gets an additional Warlord trait if he is your Warlord, and he must be your Warlord if you include him. And I think, again, this is going to be an army focused mostly on Poxwalkers, and Typhus buffs your Poxwalkers, so I think you would want to be bringing him anyway. You also gain the special keyword. You get the special Warlord trait, relic, and stratagems. You get a new discipline, the Fester Discipline, for psychic powers that we'll talk about momentarily. And you get the ability to teleport everything. Anything that is in strategic reserve. The downside is that it also increases the cost of your strategic reserve, so we're basically just using a teleport strat now. Your 1 to 9 power level is 2 CP instead of 1 CP, and then everything is increased by 1 CP, basically, in order to teleport it in. Moving on to the special Warlord trait, Harbinger of Death. So Typhus gets this in addition to his standard Warlord trait, which is, like, pretty good. It gives you a 3-inch aura that removes objective secured from any models with a leadership characteristic of 7 or less. Also stops them from performing actions, although I'm not sure that you would be performing actions within 3 inches of the Warlord, to be honest. In addition, you get +1 to your attacks while there's somebody in there. So the effect of this is really powerful. It's going to be very matchup dependent because you have to be fighting basically guardsmen. But if you are fighting guardsmen, just getting rid of objective secured for them is like pretty sick. You put Typhus in the middle of an objective so he can heroically intervene into anything, and they can't even come to contest you, because they come to contest you, you know, heroically intervene into them, remove their objective secured, and then kill half the unit. And they're just, like, super sad. So, yeah, seems good to me. And especially if you're going to be trying to drop Poxwalkers onto objectives, like, that's the whole goal. We're just trying to swarm objectives with Poxwalkers as much as possible. So, removing objective secured so that you can then hold those automatically with the Poxwalkers is a pretty sweet deal. For stratagems, we have some really interesting ones. First off, Rotting Tide lets you green tide your Poxwalkers, although it's even better than that because it allows you to reset destroyed units of Poxwalkers. So if you are below half strength, you can use it to redeploy and return the unit at full strength, or you can do it if they're dead. So it's just better than green tide. Downside, it's only Poxwalkers, it's not Orc Boys, so not quite as good. 3 CP for a full unit of 20 to come back on the table. I don't know, seems solid. Unleash the Horde for 2 CP, another buff to Poxwalkers, gives them +3 inches to their move characteristic, so they go up to a pretty reasonable move 7, and they get to pile in 3 inches, or 6 inches, excuse me, instead of 3 inches. So you can get more of them into melee once they actually make the charge. But given that it affects you both in the movement and the fight phase, and you can use it in either, you can use it in the movement phase and it still affects you for the entirety of the turn, or you could just use it in your opponent's fight phase when you fight to get the extra 3 inches of pile in. That's pretty flexible, so I think that's a fair cost for that stratagem. Pestilential Drop gives you extra range on your Contagions of Nurgle when you drop the model in. Last but not least, we've seen this last stratagem previewed. Callous Disregard allows you to shoot at units engaged by Poxwalkers or Cultists. You get -1 to hit, and if you miss, you hit the Poxwalkers instead. Hilariously, it also means that you can do things like, if your opponent has surrounded a Poxwalker unit, you can use that to shoot at them and then try to kill the Poxwalker unit so that you dig them out of engagement. Because it only affects one of your units, that would then let other units shoot at the enemy unit if you kill all the Poxwalkers that are engaging them. And also, you choose who is removed when the Poxwalkers take damage. So you can just pull the models that are engaging the enemy. So it actually allows you to leave combat in a kind of a weird roundabout way. Moving on to the Fester Discipline, the special psychic discipline that you can take in place of the Nurgle discipline when you're picking psychic powers for your psychers. This is an interesting one. I think they've really tried to couch the power of it by making all of the warp charge values super high, which isn't great. Death Guard aren't an army that have a lot of like bonuses to cast or anything like that, so they don't really have a good way to get around high warp charge values. So I think for the most part, this isn't going to be super useful, but some of the abilities are really powerful. First off, Gift of Infection. You choose an enemy within 18 inches, they get -1 toughness. Unfortunately, it's not cumulative with your contagions, so actually, that one's not very useful at all. You're just going to try to contagion people if you're trying to give them -1 toughness. Lung Rot targets an enemy unit within 18 inches. They cannot advance, and they can only charge 6 inches. Or they can only charge enemy units within 6 inches, but they could potentially charge farther. They also cannot reroll charges. This is really good. One of the downsides of Death Guard, and especially this version of Death Guard, is that it gets outmaneuvered very, very easily. And so being able to slow down enemy units so that you can engage with them is really, really powerful. Downside is you have to be within 18 inches of them, so you already have to be relatively close during your psychic phase to do that. It's also Warp Charge 7, again. So I think a very powerful and useful ability, but one that's a little bit difficult to apply. Pernicious Dose gives you a reroll to hits with plague weapons for someone within 6 inches. This isn't just melee weapons, so you can be rerolling your hit rolls with your bolt guns, for example, which is pretty nice. You also don't have, like, there's no Mortarion in this list, so you're not going to be full rerolling with his ability anyway. Noxus Discharge, we got down to Warp Charge 6, which is solid. It is a 12-inch range nuke, Goes off on a 6 and deals a mortal wound to the unit that you target, and every other unit within 3 inches outside of Nurgle units take a mortal wound as well. So these abilities are pretty good if you can stack a lot of them. We do have Shamble Rot in this sub-faction, so you do have a little bit of an ability to distribute mortal wounds across your opponent's entire army, so I don't hate this one. And it's also enemy units within 3 inches of the entirety of the unit that you hit. So, for example, if you hit a screening unit that it has a lot of other enemy units sort of around it, if they have a wide frontage, for example, you could be hitting a really large proportion of their army, depending on how their formation is set up. Rotwind, another Warp Charge 7, target something within 18 inches, and they get -2 armor penetration on all of their attacks, which is a pretty big deal, actually. One of the downsides, or I guess one of the best ways to combat Death Guard Terminators is like a high volume of AP2 weapons, because then that's just going to shoot up against their invulnerable save. But if you remove their AP, you're just going to be saving on 2s a lot. So I think that's a really good one. Again, Warp Charge 7, though. And then last but not least, Accelerated Entropy. This one, I think it has the potential to be super duper powerful. Again, Warp Charge 7, range 12. Difficult to apply, but if you get it off, you target an enemy unit, you and your opponent both roll a d6, add the toughness characteristic of the Psyker and the target unit, respectively. If you win, you deal 3 mortal wounds to the target. If you double your opponent's result, they take D3 plus 3. So it has the ability to one-shot characters pretty easily, especially if you have them in contagion range, because that will affect the toughness characteristic that they're adding. So, for example, you're shooting them with a toughness 5 Death Guard Psyker, and they're rolling with a toughness 2 Inquisitor or something like that. There's almost no way that you don't double their toughness, their result, and deal them 4 mortal wounds and just kill them, which is like pretty good, I think. And I think I like a lot of these psychic powers, but unfortunately, Warp Charge 7 across the board, outside of Noxious Discharge, is like, ooh, too much. We got some relics in here as well. Filth Sensors add 6 inches of range of psychic powers, so that allows you to expand the range of that Fester Discipline a little bit, which I think is pretty useful. Mark of the Terminus Est gives you +1 strength. You cannot have wound rolls rerolled against you, and you can once per game pass a saving throw that you would otherwise fail. Pretty solid for the most part, but you're going to be competing a lot with other relics that are very similar in this instance, so I'm not 100% sure that you're going to be taking that one. Last but not least over here, Vomix's Virulent Blight gives a plague weapon the ability to essentially infect enemy units that you hit with it with a contagion that you have, so you could just Shamble Rod somebody for the rest of the game. Downside is that you're already probably pretty close to them. Like, I guess you could put it on like a Foul Blight Spawn's flamethrower or something, right? Like, I don't know what the longest range plague weapon that an infantry character can take to shoot somebody with it, but I don't know. If you're fighting them in melee, you can probably assume that like your Death Shroud Terminators are about to kill them, so it doesn't really matter. They won't be around for too long to be affected by your contagions. Canker is a relic bolt pistol, or a plasma pistol that it just shoots with an overcharged plasma eradicator profile, 18-inch range, strength 9, AP 4 for 3 damage, and it is also a plague weapon. Kind of cute. I like it. It gives your tally man something to do with that little plasma pistol. Boo! 3 damage. Take that. Also doesn't overheat, so you can't kill himself, which is pretty cool. Rot Grip is a 3x strength power fist. This one actually seems okay. Gets you up to strength 12, which is pretty good. Also not -1 to hit, and is a plague weapon, so that's solid. The Reaper of Misery is a Man Reaper, essentially with an upgraded profile, but can only attack with the sweep attack. It does not attack with the regular style, which seems like a downgrade, to be honest, but who am I to say? Raiment of Atrophy increases the range of your aura abilities for the carrier. But anyway, that's all of the Armies of Renown. Pretty interesting stuff. I'm not sure that we're going to see many of these on the table. I think it'll be cool when we do, because I think there's some interesting builds that come out of this. For the most part, they are significantly less powerful than the standard version, which is good to see. It's good that they sort of have a good handle on the balance and where these should be at in terms of the power level. In terms of the mechanic in general, the Armies of Renown, how they work, I think it's going to be bad. This is a really dangerous mechanic to play with. I mean, it's like one of the things that killed War Machine for the most part. At least for me, theme forces becoming almost required for play was super detrimental to the experience of list building and just imposing ridiculous restrictions on players for building lists was really bad. Whether or not the same thing happens to 40k, I don't know, but I have to assume that given an unlimited amount of time that it will. Eventually, if Armies of Renown continue to be released, there will be ones that incidentally play directly into the metagame, and then that shapes how armies have to be built, because your army is lives or dies based on how powerful their Army of Renown ends up being. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be. It looks like these are match play legal and GT legal. It'll be interesting to see if that sticks around. We may get a GT clarification in the future that says, oh, don't use Armies of Renown or something. I hope that happens. And I think that there's maybe an argument to be made to preemptively ban them from competitive play events, because again, that could happen. Right now, for these 3 Armies of Renown, I don't think that's really a requirement, but that may be something that TOs will have to do in the future if one comes out that ends up being ridiculously powerful. If honestly, like if the defense cohort had not said you lose your sub-faction trait on your breachers, like I think that it may have actually just been that powerful that you could play it in a competitive setting and be super duper good. And I think that there's the potential also for the Terminus S assault force if it didn't preclude you from taking vehicles. I think that could also be potentially very powerful if the goal is to take 1 billion Poxwalkers and buff them up, through the gills, and then also follow them up with the Volkite Contemptors and the Plagueburst Crawlers and stuff like that, and just use those Poxwalkers to create space with +3 inches of move. I think there's a potential for that list to be very powerful. In this case, in this instance, they've headed those off and made it so that they're not super powerful, and I think that's good. But I'm sure that something's going to slip through the cracks eventually with these Armies of Renown. So I'm a little bit worried about the mechanic in general. I am glad that these ones in particular are not super duper good, but I do like them just from the aspect of being flavorful and from being able to create unique armies that use different mechanics. Terminus S is based around making Poxwalkers really good. The Freeblade Lance is based around burdens and qualities, which is a mechanic that we don't see very often on the table at all. Defense cohort based around, like setting to defend, I think is like an interesting direction for an army to take. Like the whole point is that you take a charge instead of moving aggressively across the table. Anyway, if there are any of these that you particularly like, and if you're planning on playing them, let me know down in the comments. And let me know if you would like me to cover the Codex supplements that also came out in War Zone Charadon. I think they're a little bit more limited in scope, but they do have some more, a wider breadth of abilities in them, which is pretty cool. Also, who's excited for that Drukhari Codex? Am I right? It's going to be good stuff. All right, that's it for me today, everybody. Big thanks to my patrons over at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise. All that stuff. Those people are amazing. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.